Alright, so we saw in the last video, we did an example of a string variable. In this lesson, we're going to be learning about a few different other types of variables, and all these different types of variables are called the data type. So here's some very common ones. Just to recap, a string is a sequence of characters, kind of like words. It can be a single word, it can be a single character, it can be a whole paragraph if you wanted it to. It's essentially one or more printable characters. And the important thing to know about a string data type is that a string, like we saw in the last video, must be enclosed in a set of double quotation marks. So it must start with a quotation mark and it must end with a quotation mark. We will dive heavily into strings into a future video, but for now just know that a string must have double quotes starting and ending in it, and it is a sequence of characters, kind of like words or paragraphs. Another data type is a char, which stands for character, and that is literally just a single character. So very similar to a string, it can be any essentially printable character, but it's only one single character versus a string is multiple characters. So syntactically, when we're typing it out, how do we know the difference? Well, again, a string will be enclosed in double quotation marks versus a character, a char, will be enclosed in a set of single quotation marks. And then another note, I call it a char. You'll hear some people call it a char. Just know that both of them mean the same thing. They're just referring to the character data type. Another one is an int, an integer, or integer. It means it's a whole number. Double is also another number, but it's a decimal or fractional number. And a Boolean, or some people call it a Boolean, some people just call it a bool. In other languages, it's actually named just a bool, but in Java, it's called a Boolean or Boolean. And that's just a value that is either true or false. So this one's really good for storing kind of like flags, like light switch. Is the light switch on or is the light switch off? It's either true or it's false. It's either 1 or it's 0. You know, they all mean essentially the same thing. And then a little note on the string here, the string data type. It's technically an object, and we will get more into that in a little bit, actually, in the next slide right here. There are essentially two types of data types within the Java programming language. There is one type, which is called primitive data types, and then the other type is essentially everything else. It's essentially like all the classes and objects and even wrapper classes, and we'll try and we will get into a little bit what that means in the next lesson. But for this one, we're going to focus on primitive data types because these are, I would say, kind of the more common ones, especially throughout all programming languages. These 8 primitive data types really derive from the C programming language. The C programming language is sort of like the granddaddy language. A lot of the common languages are really derived off of C. You know, Java, JavaScript, C++, obviously, Python, Swift is even a little bit of Swift is the iOS programming language. Swift was derived, or sort of the predecessor of Objective-C, and Objective-C was obviously made off of C. But essentially, primitive data types are some of the oldest types of things used in programming languages. Now, the difference, some of the key differences of primitive data types, they store just a single data value. So with our string that we saw earlier, we didn't go over any examples, but we could have had additional functions with our string, and I'll show you that in the next video when we start doing some examples of primitive data types. But just know that a primitive data type can only hold an actual value. They are small, fixed size of memory, so when we tell the program to remember a certain variable, we are telling, well, that program will automatically knows how much memory or space it needs to allocate to save that variable. Again, it has no methods or functions to it, so it is literally, again, just the data value itself. And there's 8 of them. There's the byte, short, int, long, float, double, Boolean, and char. We already went over char, already went over Boolean, already went over double. A float is very similar to double. A double, again, is a decimal or fractional number. A float is also a decimal or fractional number. Floats are smaller than doubles, so if you need to hold a big decimal number, use a double. A long is kind of like an integer, except a long is a very big whole number, versus an integer is still a really big whole number. Don't get me wrong, an integer can go up to, or all the way down to negative 2 billion, 2.1 billion, all the way up to 2.1 billion, versus a long will go up to whatever that number is, negative 9 something up to positive 9 something. I could figure out the number. I don't have the character right now. But that's the range of it. And we'll get into the range in the next video as well, because just know it'll be easier to say it with this one. With the short has a range. A short stores a whole number as well, just like an integer, just like a long, and also just like a byte. A short, though, holds a whole number, but only from negative 32,768 up to positive 32,767. So if I wanted to store a number of, let's say, 40,000, I would not be able to use the short data type. I would have to use an integer. And we'll sort of briefly touch on, what happens when you try to do something like that in the next video. And then also the byte, it stores whole numbers from negative 128 to positive 127. And then here's the fixed sizes of all of them too. Like I said before, when I create a integer data type, as soon as the program sees that I'm trying to create a brand new variable of data type integer, it's going to say, hey, I know integers. I know I need to save 4 bytes and exactly 4 bytes of computer memory in order for you to use this integer data type. Yes, I think, alright, and then, yeah, integer, double, Boolean, they're probably the most common that you will be using throughout programming. Yeah, let's not go over, we will go over wrapper classes in the next video, so let's stop this one for now. In the next lesson, in the next video, we're going to go over back to our online compiler, and we're going to type in, we're going to start doing, typing out some of these primitive data types. So, see you all there.